Well, hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Red and White Authority, episode number 25. I know it's been a while. Kevin has been jet-setting, as he usually does, all over the country to various hockey games, and I have a job at WDET in Detroit, which is issue-oriented, not sports-oriented. It's taken this old brain of mine to get thinking non-sports-like here, so it's been a bunch of trials and tribulations, and besides, every day when we planned on doing this, it seemed like more news was breaking. So Mike Babcock finally had his exit interview with the Detroit media today. That's all in the past. Once Grand Rapids Griffins win the Calder Cup or are eliminated from the AHL playoffs, Jeff Blashill will soon afterwards be announced as the next coach of the Detroit Red Wings. But with all that said, welcome to the Red and White Authority, episode 25. Art Regner along with Hockey Hall of Fame writer for USA Today, Kevin Allen. And Kevin, let's get right into it. This Mike Babcock saga, if you've lived in Detroit like we do, has actually been going on for over a year now. It's finally culminated with him going to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this is an odd story because reports were that Buffalo thought he had a deal with him. It's signed, sealed, and delivered that they agreed to terms. So much so that Brendan Shanahan reveals that they had another coach waiting in the wings. They were all set to go with their plan B, and that the coach was already in Toronto for another press conference, and then all of a sudden Mike Babcock calls up and says, I'm in, and then all Hades breaks loose in the National Hockey League. I mean, can you kind of hone in what exactly just happened this past week with Mike Babcock?
Yeah, I mean it is complicated, but you can really basically boil it down to the simplest reality is that the money offered by the Toronto Maple Leafs was so incredible that it could not be refused. That I think, as we all did, that Mike Babcock was being truthful, during the entire season when he said, he wasn't likely to move. I think he felt he was going to stay in Detroit. And even in our wildest imaginations, I don't think any of us thought that Toronto Maple Leafs were going to offer an 8-year deal at $50 million. Like, that really is life-altering money. And it just cannot be turned down. So, I think there are no, hidden stories here with why he left Detroit. It was simply about the money. I think the bigger question is why he chose Toronto over Buffalo. I mean, I think we've talked about, and I think everyone would agree, that the opportunity in Buffalo in terms of the personnel that will be available to him was far more intriguing. He's going to get Jack Eichel, who just recently competed at the World Championships in the Czech Republic with NHL players, looked very comfortable in that role, looked like he's going to be able to step right in next season and be an impact player at age 18. He's the best American-born center prospect since Mike Modano. He looks like he's going to be a Sidney Crosby-style impact player. Plus, they've got Sam Reinhart, son of former NHL player Paul Reinhart, who is another center. They've got Evander Kane. They've got a lot of quality young players, including a couple of defensemen. So they look like they're going to be a team. And the money that Terry Pegula was offering, and Terry Pegula is a billionaire who also owns the Buffalo Bills, was at least in the ballpark. It was like $5 million. And, the difference between the Red Wings offer of $4 million and the $6.25 million that he got, plus the fact the Red Wings would not go long term, that's easy to see why Babcock would go with the Maple Leafs. But it's a little less so with the Buffalo situation because, the money wasn't that different. But ultimately, my theory is on that, and supported by what Mike Babcock said at his press conference, is, he's a proud Canadian. And we all know that. He coached the Canadian Olympic team in 2010 and 2014, the gold medals. He's taken the Team Canada to a world championship. The lure of coaching one of Canada's top two franchises and trying to transform it into a winner for the first time since 1967, the lure was too great. And that's why he chose Toronto over Buffalo. Now, what the timeline was and all that, and why there was some confusion, I can't answer that. But I do know that I find it's going to be a little bit difficult for Babcock to be a babysitter, which is what they're suggesting that he will be in the first, at least for the couple of seasons, because the rebuilding hasn't even started yet.
Right,
I mean,
right.
like this summer they're going to have to dump a bunch of players. So it's going to be a process. So he says there's going to be some pain, which I thought was an interesting quote. And they're going to start moving out players, and so Mike Babcock will do all that he can to try to make that team better, because that's what he does. But sounds like it's going to take at least a couple seasons, maybe even 3, before they're even remotely competitive.
Well, I think what's interesting, and I watched Sportsnet's like 3.5-hour coverage of the entire Mike Babcock thing yesterday, and it was kind of funny where when Babcock said this is Canada's team, and people took offense to that, other Canadians, that they weren't Canada's team, and then George Strampanopoulos says, well, that's because they get so much coverage, meaning Toronto, and then Nick Kiprio said, like we're giving them right now, I mean, they are, for all intents and purposes, everything Maple Leaf. At least the Canadian press seems to be obsessed with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Maybe because many of them are based in Toronto, but it is pretty amazing. And I thought today, and I was thinking this too, at his exit press conference in Detroit, he's kind of like the Jim Harbaugh of Toronto right now. If Babcock gets on Twitter, heaven help us all, because we'll be getting reports on him every single day, and I mean this in the nicest possible way. I think everybody in Detroit, from the Red Wing organization all the way down to the fan base, thank you, Mike. Not good riddance. Good luck. And we'll see it, because I don't think anybody can stand having any more Babcock news. I mean, this thing has played itself out, and it's nice. I mean, and I guess I'm happy for Babs. And I want to get back to Buffalo, because that press conference yesterday in Toronto, and Mike, again, brought it up today in his Detroit exit press conference, where he said, have I crossed the line with a player or two or a media member? Certainly. But he always has been a pretty stand-up and forward guy. But when one member of the Buffalo media insinuated, didn't outright call him that he was a liar, that kind of upset me, because Mike Babcock may be a lot of things: abrasive, in love with himself, somewhat arrogant. I can see that, and Babcock will acknowledge that. I don't think he's a liar, and maybe I'm wrong. I thought that kind of went across the line. Maybe I was wrong.
Yeah. Again, I don't know what happened there. But my dealings with him also tell me the same thing, Art. He and I have had a very good relationship. He's been very respectful of what I do. In turn, I've certainly been respectful of the job he's done as well. So, as I said, I believe he was sincere I think initially he thought he was going to be staying here, but I don't even think he could have anticipated the bidding that went on for his service. The other thing that I find really fascinating is, because of now the 8-year deal and the total package of $50 million, they have put Mike Babcock in a position of incredible power. Like, it's impossible for him to be fired in the first 3 or 4 years of that deal, simply because they'd have to give him so much money to pay him off that it would look ridiculous. So he essentially has carte blanche to do whatever he wants. There will be, there's going to be very little accountability if he's going to play who he wants to play. He's going to cut who he wants to cut. He's going to send down who he wants to send down. He is fully in charge of that team, because they have no way, really, because he can say to them, well, what are you going to do? Fire me? They're not going to fire him. So he's in a position of incredible power, and he's earned that, obviously, with achieving the level of recognition and reputation that he now has. And I think it's interesting that he talked about crossing the line. I think he has made hay as a very confrontational coach. Like, people have asked me to compare him to Scotty Bowman. I think they were two completely different style of coaches.
I agree with that.
Scotty Bowman ruled with an iron fist, but he never really spoke to players. Brett Hull was really the only player that he talked to very often, and he did so because he liked talking to Brett. And mostly, he controlled his team by simply not playing the guys and reducing their ice time, and you were left guessing, which can be frustrating, to what he thought. And where Mike Babcock was not like that. When Mike Babcock did not like how you played, he told you that, and he told you in no uncertain terms, and that can be uncomfortable, for some players. And I've had conversations with some of my readers about it, and I say, look, it's not hard to understand because all of us are in an employable situation. Most of us have a boss, and through the course of our careers, we always have bosses that we like and we don't like. And it's no different for players and coaches. That's a boss, and sometimes you get along with them, and sometimes you don't. And I think, Mike Babcock, some players respected him, some didn't enjoy. Do you think Jacob Kindle enjoyed playing for Mike Babcock? I doubt it. I'm pretty sure that was, not on his list of his favorite, coaches. And,
I'm sorry, Kevin. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I mean, getting back to Scotty real quickly. And we've told this, or I've told this story on the Red and White Authority about Kevin Hanson's first game, where Scotty said, "You can be lit up, but you've earned this opportunity. You're going to be in the whole game against Pittsburgh." And this was when Pittsburgh was not a very good hockey club, and so. And Kevin Hanson's feeling really good. He gets he's walking into the Red Wing room. Scotty calls him into the office. It's the old configuration of how the Red Wing room used to be. So you have to walk right by the coach's office in order to get into the locker room. And Kevin Hanson says he feels great. He goes, "Wow, that was really nice of Scotty Bowman," and wow, I felt great. And then he says it was the only time he ever talked to me. Was right then. And you're right. Even Nick Lidstrom says I never talked to him. He never really said much to me. Certain guys maybe, but you're absolutely right. And I think I think that Mike, as we all do when we get older, had a little bit of a metamorphosis. I think where he kind of ran afoul with some of the Red Wing players, especially the veteran players, was that he was very bombastic, and if he didn't like what you were doing, he would tell you. Unfortunately, there's almost an unwritten rule, and you know this within a team or the confines of a professional team. If you have something to say to somebody, you're more than willing to say it, but you say it behind closed doors. And sometimes Babcock's, I think just because of his personality, just didn't do that, and it rubbed a lot of guys the wrong way.
Yeah, no, I've heard the same stories, and I think that there's truth to that. And basically what you're saying is instead of calling a player out for a closed door meeting and taking a strip off them that way, it spewed out into the dressing room area, and players do not like that. They want their issues with their coach to be private, and probably that's what Babcock was talking about there. And I don't think it happened every day, but it happened enough where it was an issue. And obviously Babcock has had a few feuds with players through the through his career. He and Franzen didn't always see eye to eye, obviously, because he expected more out of the Mule, and I think the Mule, didn't. Who is a pretty soft-spoken man, probably had trouble with his style of coaching. But it's going to be fascinating now because they've been under King Babcock for a lot of years now, and now we're going to have a new successor, Jeff Blashill, who's a different personality. But I would say this: I'm predicting right now that Jeff Blashill, who is a really nice players coach, I think he'll draw a line in the sand and to make sure everybody knows that he can be tough in training camp. He doesn't want to be known right off the bat as a players coach. But I compare him to what John Cooper is doing in Tampa. That's what I think we'll see out of Blashill. He's a very modern coach, a guy who's an excellent communicator, and he'll be different than Babcock. But we've seen through his work in Grand Rapids what he's capable of doing. It's ongoing. Whatever team you give him, he seems to make competitive. Now, who does that remind you of? That reminds you of Babcock, because
right, exactly.
Babcock's best work usually came when the team was in dire straits, when you didn't expect much from them. And now I think we have a guy like Jeff Blashill who will be able to do exactly the same thing. I think he'll do his best work when you expect the least from the team.
Well, I want to get back quickly to the Toronto situation because obviously at the start of Mike Babcock's press conference, the first thing that Brendan Shanahan says is he wants to thank Kenny Howland and the Detroit Red Wing organization for allowing this basically to happen, to open up the conversation. And he says, both Mike and I go back a long ways. Well, a lot of people were under the speculation that Brendan only played, I think, for Babs for a year here in Detroit. But again, because of his abrasive style, he rubbed a lot of those veteran players the wrong way, probably much like Ned Harkness might have done when he walked into a room with Alex Delvecchio and Gordie Howe, and they were very set in their ways, that things were going to be done a certain way. And I'm certainly not comparing Mike Babcock and Ned Harkness, but I'm just saying that maybe the same feeling that could Brendan survive, or why would Brendan want to bring in Mike Babcock? But it appears to me, based on that press conference yesterday, that Brendan Shanahan's role with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he might have some say in player personnel, but I think he's almost kind of an arm's length away from everything and saying, this is your team, and if it's Mark Hunter or whomever, all right, guys, I've hired you to do a job, now go do it. Now, am I wrong in that? Because I thought he would be more hands-on. I kind of got the impression yesterday he might not be as hands-on as we're led to believe, where he might do interviews and talk about what's going on, and Shanny's a very affable guy and very likable and has always been good with the media. So thinking that a dynamic that I wouldn't work, I think might work, and maybe Brendan might be the smartest man in the room.
Well, I don't think that Brendan Shanahan left the league office to run the business side of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He may be saying the right things, and I don't think he meddles in line combinations or any of that. But he's involved. He sat and analyzed that team for a full season, and I think what sometimes the fans can't come to grips with, that the player Brendan Shanahan and the administrator Brendan Shanahan are two different people. He learned a lot at the league office, and he's a very calculating man, and he has a presence about him as a manager. I've seen him talk and explain the supplementary discipline system to GMs, and he's explained it to the media. And the system that we now have, which is now what we accept as the way to do business with the videos and the precedent being established, and the 4 or 5 points that you have to look at, that was all developed by Brendan. That kind of shows, and he renamed that office the player safety. That was his call. He said, I'll take the job, but I'm going to call it the Office of Player Safety. He never liked it when we called him the discipline czar. So he's had a metamorphosis too, and I think he's become an administrator who gets everything and realizes that he has to relinquish some of his power in order to be successful. And by giving Babcock that money, as I said previously, you're assuring that he has all of the power, because he is fireproof. And you just can't move him out. There's too much money at stake. So you've got to just accept the fact. But I do believe that Brendan is going to be very involved in those decisions, and I think the GM he hires comes in knowing that Brendan is going to have things to say about what he does. And it's probably no different than in Calgary with Brian Burke as the president. I think Tree Living is the GM and makes a lot of decisions, but we can all guess that every week or so, or maybe every 3 weeks, Brian Burke might walk into that office and say, I really think we ought to do this. And he probably listens, and I think that's probably what will happen with the new GM and Shanahan. He won't interfere on a daily basis, but every once in a while he'll walk in and maybe make his opinion known.
So you think the Leafs will hire a general manager? That seemed to be the, after the Babcock hire, that seemed to be what everybody wanted to know yesterday.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. There's gonna be a GM. I don't think there's any question about that.
Be Mark or is that he's been like saying that he's going to draft the team or he's going to assess the personnel.
Yeah. Well, I think he will be actively involved, but if he was going to be GM, I think they would have named him GM.
Right, by now, right? Yeah, that absolutely. See, Kevin, you make sense. I mean, I'm all over the road. I mean, you're honing it right in. We wish Mike Babcock well. I think that he. I think the interesting thing, and I think at times some people here in Detroit thought that maybe he was a bit disingenuous, but I think his press conference today, where he said he wasn't selling his home because his kids want to come back here and train, and that we tend to forget sometimes that they're people, they have families, and for 10 years his kids now, his last child is just graduating from high school, and she finally got her last paper done, I guess. Babcock said she should have had it done sooner, but he was joking around because the printer woke him up when he was trying to sleep to make this decision. But my point being is that his kids really did grow up here. They really did grow up in Detroit, and even though he and his wife are going to live the cosmopolitan life in a condo in Toronto, which sounds pretty cool, really, his kids still, when it's time to come back for summer vacation, they don't want to go up to the lake in Saskatchewan. They want to come back to Detroit. So that I think this was a more difficult decision than maybe we here in Detroit thought, especially maybe because we're Americans. We hear 8 years, $50 million. It's like, I don't care where it is. I don't care if it's in the middle of the Sahara Desert. I'm going, Yeah. But it did look like he really did struggle with this decision, and I didn't think I thought whomever gives him the most money, he's gone. And in the end, maybe that's the way it worked out, where the Toronto Maple Leafs used their financial power, but I don't think it was easy for him.
No, and it won't be easy either. Like, Mike Babcock's one of his, I don't know if you could call it this, but one of his joys was running along the Detroit River on his daily runs. He won't be able to do that in Toronto. There's a nice, obviously he can run along the lake there. There's the beautiful, path and park area down there. But, all the runners, and there are many of them, most of them are going to be hockey fans, and they're going to get up, run alongside of them, and engage them in conversation. And it won't be all about the running like it is, in Detroit. So it's going to be a different environment, and he won't be able to go out and have as much privacy. But I will say that I don't know if I know a coach who's better equipped to handle, the situation of being under the spotlight in Toronto, as well as Babcock could. It's almost like, there's those noise-canceling headphones that you can get. Like, he has that in his brain. What goes on around him in terms of the media and all, he can just block it out. And, it doesn't register with him. He doesn't care about it. Every once in a while, something will pop in and it'll tick him off, but rarely does he worry about what everybody's thinking or what the fans are saying or what all that media attention's all about. He's focused on making the team better, and I think he's he's equipped for that. So I don't think they've picked. I think they have picked the right guy. Like, could anybody have faced more pressure than Babcock did, trying to win the gold medal for Canada when the team was favored, playing on Canadian soil in 2010? That was a lot of pressure. I think he's really equipped to handle the Toronto spotlight.
I agree with you, but I look at it this way, and I think I look at it a little bit differently. And he actually brought this up, and that's why he said term with Detroit wasn't as important as it was with some of the other teams, primarily I would assume Buffalo and Toronto, because he knows what he has in Detroit, and he knows what's coming in Detroit, and he just saw Dylan Larkin play. Granted, he also saw Jack Eichel play. That And in Canada, I mean, he had a team of superstars. I mean, there's a lot of pressure to win. In the Olympics, it's a short tournament. Anything can happen. Injuries, hot goalie. I understand that. But he had one of the best teams ever assembled in the history of hockey, playing on their own soil with a crowd that was totally. You were there. I mean, these people were bonkers for Team Canada, and Team USA almost miraculously pulled an upset. I mean, Ryan Miller stood on his head in that. It's kind of ironic now that he plays for Vancouver. But with all that said, my point being is that he took over Detroit, was a good team. He took over Anaheim. They weren't a great team, but he got them to the Stanley Cup final in year 2 and upset the defending Stanley Cup champion Detroit Red Wings in the first round. He is now going to a situation where he knows is a bad situation, and that's why he wanted this long term. But I almost equate it, since I'm full of cliches today, that foxhole mentality where he's not used to losing like he's going to lose with this Maple Leaf team. We know how he is. He does have a desire to win, but everyday grind of losing. Sorry, Leaf fans. I mean, I think that even you have to admit it's going to be not a quick turnaround. Of losing, having the press every day ask you those questions, regardless of the filter. I am not sure that even Mike Babcock, I don't know if it's even human nature when you're beat upon constantly like that, not to maybe start to have, not doubt in yourself, but doubt in saying, man, a messed up situation. I can't stand it. Where he would almost say, maybe Buffalo isn't that bad, or hey, San Jose, I don't know, that he might be, because the report was yesterday that there was an out clause after 5 years, and there's no out clause. I mean, he's signed, sealed, and delivered for 8. I know he's Captain Canada, he loves his nation and all that kind of stuff, but if he's going to have, a losing record for 3 or 4 seasons, and the Toronto press, and we're Canada's team, and we got to turn it around. And everybody said, well, he didn't make any promises. He, yesterday, there's no parade, or all these people come in when they take over the Leafs and talk about we're going to win this, we're going to do that. He was more realistic. But when he said, Canada's team should be good, that pretty much is telling me what his aspirations are. I know I'm rambling here, Kevin, and I like Mike. I think you know that. I think we all do. I mean, he's a stand-up guy. But I think I know him well enough where even the money's great, the term's great, the team blows. And I mean, how is he going to handle it? I mean, year upon year, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be fascinating to watch what he calls the journey is the fun part. I don't know how fun this journey is going to be to turn the Leafs around. I mean, because it's been tried before for almost decades. We're almost like we're talking about the Detroit Lions here for a minute, that, they've changed, they bring in big names, and, you think you're getting the right coach, and you're doing this, and you're drafting this guy, and it just doesn't seem to happen. So I guess, Kevin, as much as I believe in Babcock, and I like Mike, he might be in an impossible situation, regardless of Brendan Shanahan. I mean, they've been down this road before in Toronto. Is Babcock really that much of a difference maker?
Well, I believe he is. I think that the way they are viewing it is, if they're starting from scratch and they'll be adding players for the long term, 1 or 2 at a time, or 3 for the next 3 years, that they want them learning to play what the players now call the right way. And so I think what their hope is that even though from the outside it looks like babysitting duty for 3 years and not really coaching, I think they're hoping that he's going to train these players to be champions, and that the process will be expedited because he's in charge of it. But the one thing I would say is, and I've been saying this kind of all day, is that the one thing that you and I have both noted is Babcock seems to do his best work when the situation is dire. I mean, we saw him with the Red Wing team in 2013-14 that maybe wasn't good enough to get into the playoffs and did. And we've seen other seasons when, you had a JV defense going because guys were all hurt, and they'd continue to win and kind of plug along. So I think maybe in the back of Brendan Shanahan's mind, he's thinking, well, if anybody could expedite the process here, maybe it's Babcock. Maybe he can fast track it. That if we get rid of Kessel and Phaneuf and Bozak and a few other guys, maybe Cadre, and we bring in guys that are more to his liking, that maybe we can kind of piece it together, and maybe the pain won't be as bad. Now, as you pointed out, Mike Babcock said it is going to be painful. So, and he's a realist. So, I think we're just going to have to let this play out. I think your point is a very valid one, though. He's all about winning. So how will he react when it's losing? Now, he seems to be saying all the right things, like, we're going to have to take a while and all that. But saying and doing are two different things, and so we'll have to see kind of how he reacts. But, he'll just have to, on those days when, things are going to be bad, he's going to have to remind himself that, he's coaching Canada's team, as he likes to call it, and he's earning $6.25 million per season for doing that.
Well, I know I'm going overboard here, but I don't want him to wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat in his well-furnished condo in Toronto and go into the bathroom and look in the mirror and go, I am a good coach. I really am a good coach. Because the Leafs can do that to you. There's a team that once it starts going south for these guys, but you're right, he's probably going to change the makeup of the team, or at least the mindset of the team. They were speculating that maybe he wants to see these players first. Mike Babcock said something which might be a bit disingenuous, that he really didn't know the Leafs, and he's only seen them from afar. I think he has a pretty good idea, at least what he has with Phil Kessel or what he has with Dion Phaneuf. And again, from Red Wing fans, and I've been bombarded all day with this, Brendan's in charge. Now you have Babs there. Everybody seems to indicate that Dion Phaneuf was livid that he didn't go to Detroit, wants to be a Detroit Red Wing. Now that could change, obviously, and Babs said great things about Dion Phaneuf, and Phaneuf said good things about Babs. Now that you have Babs in charge along with Brendan, does it make it easier or harder for Detroit to acquire Dion Phaneuf? Because the speculation is that is, regardless of what happened now that Babs is there, that is probably going to be revisited this summer.
Well, I find it fascinating that, I'm sure Babcock was excited here in Detroit at the prospect of getting Phaneuf. Really the style of defenseman that they haven't had, a big, strong, physical player with a big shot. And now all of a sudden his mission is to get rid of him when he was here. So I don't know. Like, of all the guys that are there that are going to be moved out, and I've said this today, and people think I'm crazy, but I kind of wonder whether he might be intrigued enough to say to Brendan, hey, let's hang on to this guy through training camp and let me work with him, and if we still want to trade him at next year's trade deadline, we could do that. Like, to me, Phaneuf would be the one guy that, if I was Babcock, I'd want to kind of see, where we're at with him, because he has some abilities that you don't find all in one player. As I mentioned, he's a physical player. He can throw his weight around. He's got a booming shot. He's got an offensive minded. He can play ornery, and he's got some size. He's got a little bulk to him. It'll be interesting. The problem you'll have now also is you're going to be making a trade with Mike Babcock, essentially, even if it's with another GM, and Babcock's going to know all of the players you're trying to push. So, right. If you can't push Jacob Kindle on Mike Babcock.
Oh God, I think Kindle would he'd go back to the Czech Republic before he'd go play for Babcock.
Well, but my point is that like some of the players down in Grand Rapids that you might be able to sell as another team of, he's got a lot of promise, and Mike Babcock's saying, well, he's 43rd on your list out of 40 players. He's going to know what's going on. So So in that regard, I think it makes it more difficult. He's going to know all the Detroit prospects and warts and all, and he's going to want the good players, and he's not going to want the ones that you're have doubts about. So I would guess it's going to make it harder to get that done.
Well, yeah, I'm under the assumption that the best chance of Dion Phaneuf becoming a Detroit Red Wing was last trade deadline. I mean, I just don't see it happening either. I know we can talk about the Leafs. They're a fascinating subject, and as I've said many times, when you grow up in Detroit, watch Hockey Night in Canada, for a time there, if you're right around Kevin and my age, you saw almost as many Leaf games as you did Red Wing games. But with that said, let's move over to the Red Wings. I know we talked about Jeff Blashill. Technically, out of respect to the Grand Rapids Griffin players that are going for this their second Calder Cup in a 3-year span, I can see where the Red Wings are not going to announce Jeff Blashill right now and let him be focused. He is a player's coach. It's a great story. He was born in Detroit. His dad's a former Detroit police officer. He was raised in Sault Ste. Marie because his dad was also a professor of criminal justice, and he was a longtime prof up at Lake Superior State. Played for Ferris State, Jeff Blashill did, and then it was a couple of years of a grad assistant, I think, for Bob Daniels at Ferris, and then went over to Rico Blasi at Miami, helped build that program into a national power. Then when I think it was Indianapolis and Western Michigan and Detroit for a year and Grand Rapids, in a way it kind of has almost a coaching pedigree that Mike Babcock had, just jumping from job to job. What is the biggest obstacle, do you believe, that Jeff Blashill will face as Detroit Red Wings head coach?
That's a great question. Well, probably it's going to be a little bit with the veterans. He's going to have a relationship with Tatar and Nyquist and Sheehan and Yurko and guys that were his guys, and so there probably is going to be a little resentment, I would think, from maybe some of the veterans that they're going to see everything he does with them as a reflection on the fact that he was their coach. It's a small thing, but in a dressing room situation where nobody would express it like this, but the feelings matter, and everybody's trying to get along. So he'll sort of have to establish that that those guys are not going to get favored treatment, that he's not automatically going to give Sheehan the best wingers because or more power play time because he helped him win an AHL championship. It'll be just those kind of things, and the difficulty of following a legend. Like, it's not easy. Ask Dave Lewis how hard it was to follow Scotty Bowman. Mike Babcock is a legendary coach now, even though he's still coaching. Because of the success he had in the international competition and all the years of winning here, where the 50-win seasons and so forth. He had a reputation about him. So, and it's never easy. There are hundreds of examples of people failing when they've had to follow legendary figures because no one can live up. Everyone's going to measure him to Babcock. So, if next season, if Babcock is coaching, the team lost 7 of their first 10, everybody go, if that happens for Blashill, there'll be a lot of talk about, well, he's not the coach that we thought he was. He's not going to be able to get the job done.
Well, what I'm curious about, Blashill's a former goalie. He was a goalie at Ferris. He has Peter Mrazek, whom, when Peter Mrazek became a Grand Rapids Griffin, he was a member of the Toledo Walleye for like a week, and then they promoted him to Grand Rapids. He turned their season around, won a Calder Cup. We know now, and because it's Detroit, there has to be some sort of goaltending controversy going on, and you have Blashill walking into a situation, not that he has anything against Jimmy Howard. I mean, we tend to forget Blashill was here for a year. So these veterans, he's not walking in completely cold into the room. I mean, many of these guys like Datsuk and Zetterberg and Cromwell, the core guys, know who he is. And so, and obviously he recruited Danny DeKaiser, or was part of it, who coached him at Western. So, there is a familiarity with some of the veterans. But I guess my point being is that he's got a comfort level, as you pointed out, with some of these guys, and they won him a championship in the AHL, which I guess by all accounts is considered to be the second best professional league in the entire world. With that said, I kind of think that if I'm Jimmy Howard right now, I'm working my butt off this summer, and I'm going in, not that he wouldn't have before, but with the way this situation is, and especially with the relationship Blashill has with Mrazek, I think Jimmy better be ready from the get-go, because if he starts off slowly, I don't think Blashill will have any hesitation. Not that Babcock wouldn't, because I think Babcock would do probably the same thing. But, this could be Mrazek's job very, very soon.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think we've kind of both felt that it was going to be his job anyway.
Yeah.
I think just the way he performed, and I think Jimmy Howard knows it, and I think he knew it even before it happened. Like, there was the comments from Bedard just saying, when he told Jimmy, hey, it's not like you didn't know this was coming. You didn't know you were going to have to compete with Mrazek. You knew he was a good goalie, and this day was going to come. So, at worst, actually at best for Jimmy Howard, it's a competition. At worst, the job is already Mrazek's, and he gets it either by Mrazek collapsing or him winning it back. So, but I don't think there's any question that Blashill will look at it that he's going to go with any guy he thinks gives him the best opportunity for success, because relationships will fall by the wayside as Blashill starts to feel his own pressure to succeed, to be able to duplicate what Babcock did. Like, it's almost as if, I would say, like I've said to you before, that in Michigan football, 500 is 8-3. I would say 500 for a Red Wings coach is, 47, 48 wins, maybe more, So Blashill comes in under a fair amount of pressure. This team has to perform for him well, because everyone is going to assume that Babcock would have had this team into the playoffs and flirting with 50 wins next season.
Well, and when we look at it, even though he is not the head coach yet, and I don't want to put words in Kevin's mouth, but we're basically telling you it's Jeff Blashill. Trust me, Jeff Blashill is the next coach of the Detroit Red Wings. That now the Red Wings can move forward. I mean, I think one of the reasons that they gave Mike Babcock permission and didn't let this thing carry out so he could start talking to teams on June 30th when his contract expired, because they wanted to move on to their next phase. So now everything is in place. I am under the impression from the way Kenny Collin talked at his press conference that Tony Granato at least has an option to come back. I think Tony Granato, with his brother coaching over now in Plymouth with the development team, the under-17 team, he's the head coach, that, depending, I guess, might check it out, that he's probably going to come back with Jeff Blashill. They like Tony Granato, as you said many, many times, and, the Red Wings, if they really wanted Granato, I think they might offer him some sort of extension or sweeten the deal. Who knows? If they want somebody, they usually keep them.
Yeah.
With that said, where do they go from here? I mean, because, Babs had that reputation of being abrasive. That's the best way to put it. And, there was among Detroit's fan base the speculation that free agents didn't want to come here and play for him because he is tough and he is demanding. Does this kind of open up the free agent market a little bit more, where guys might look at Detroit in a more favorable light because they had a negative, whether it was correct or not, of Mike Babcock?
Yeah, I'm just not sure that was true, though. I've never believed that, and I say that based on conversations that I've had with top players including Sidney Crosby, who had great admiration for him. Plus, I did a survey every year. The NHL has a national media tour where the national writers, the 5 or 6 of us, and all the television networks come in, and we get 11 minutes with 30-some NHL stars. And as part of that, twice in the last 5 years, I've done surveys asking players to name the top coach in the league, and Mike Babcock has won both of those surveys. So I think the impressions of him, even though I think everybody knew that he was a tough coach, is that you wanted to play for him. So, when they didn't get the free agents, I always felt it wasn't about Babcock. It wasn't about the arena. It was strictly about the fact that it was difficult to read how good this Red Wing team was. And I think that, I'm not sure that that's really changed. I think it's still a little bit of a difficult read because Datsuk and Zetterberg are older, and the younger players aren't quite well established enough. But, if Dylan Larkin turns out to be the player that everybody thinks he will be, then suddenly the outlook of the team is better. And I think, I think Blashill's reputation, even though he's a young coach, I think Cooper, what he's done with Tampa, I think is going to help Blashill, because people are going to say, hey, I hear it's just fun and great to play for Cooper in Tampa, which, everybody knows is true. And Blashill is considered to be a similar type personality. I've certainly known and met the guy, and I can concur with that he does sort of remind me a little bit of Cooper.
Yeah, well, I think the world of Jeff Blashill, too. I mean, when he was at Western Michigan was when I first got to know him fairly well. And, and I've gone down the last couple of years when he was at Grand Rapids and caught a couple of the Griffins games just to see it. And he's very accommodating, obviously. But in a strange sense, if you were to close your eyes and listen to him speak, he almost sounds like Mike Babcock. I mean, they have a similar inflection in their voices. Now let's look at this Red Wing club. Jeff Blashill's in place. We talked about a little bit about free agency. Ken Holland is obviously trying to get it together. They're going to have their pro scouts come in. Do you think at this point they're going to, because people say, well, we need a score. Detroit needs a score. Poor Eric Cole, probably his career is done. Although, as we've said on previous Red and White Authorities, we've heard that before, and it wasn't true. But where do they go from here? Jimmy Devellano, who's been making a lot of comments lately about everything, said that Detroit's young prospects of defensemen, which fans are so high on, none of them is higher than a number 4 at the most, And, I heard Ken Holland say, well, we played a team that eventually won the Stanley Cup where they had, their 6 defensemen all were number 4s, but that's pretty good, and they kept coming at us and coming at us and coming at us and coming at us. So if we have a bunch of number 4s down there, I'm not that worried about it. So what direction do you see them going in right now? Because Mike Babcock had strong opinions, and it finally came out, something that we knew. He did not want Val Filppula here. He wanted Stephen Weiss. And the Red Wings said, okay. And they did that. I don't think Jeff Blashill is going to be in there demanding players at this point. If anything, he's probably going to be pushing for the guys in Grand Rapids that have been so good to him. How does this change, I guess, the Red Wings' approach to free agency and trades and player acquisition now that Babcock's gone?
Well, I think it does. I think it does change it because, for example, Jacob Kendall, who I think would have just moved out. Now, do you think to yourself, well, Jacob Kendall has some offensive flair. We all know that. Would he fare better under a Blashill coaching regime? And you're thinking to yourself, okay, Blashill knows these young defensemen, Sproul, in particular, Marchenko. Will they respond to him better? Brendan Smith, will he do better under Blashill? So, and now Polkinen. Ken Holland has said before, that's true. They have to make a decision this year on him, but will he do better under Blashill, a coach that he's had success under? So you got to weigh all that in. I still think that what Jim Demilano says just hits home. That they really need to look outside for at least one defenseman. I think they are going to change up their defense, but I think some of it's going to come from within. But I think they're going to make a run at Mike Green. And why wouldn't they? I mean, he's sort of exactly what they need. Again, they need that big shot from the point. And Green had a good season, and Trotz sort of turned him around. But I think if he got to Detroit, his numbers would even be better, because he would, in Washington, he was competing with Carlson and Niskanen for, prime playing time on the power play. There would be no doubt if Green came here, he'd be the number one point man on the power play. So I would think they'll make a run at one of the prominent offensive-minded defensemen, and then also look to change up within the organization. A guy like Yurko that I thought might be traded this summer, with Blashill coming on, I think you give him more of an opportunity now, and see if he can, Blashill can get him going, because there's a lot of talent there. And what I do like about Yurko is there's talent and he has some size.
Right, he's big.
Yeah. Tatar and Nyquist are smaller scorers, so it would be nice if they had a little bit of a bigger guy. So I think it changes a little bit, and I would think Ferraro now is. I thought all along they would give him an opportunity to be a guy on that fourth line, and now I'm sure that if Blashill has a say, he'll get him an opportunity, because Ferraro sort of has that Patrick Eaves feeling about him, where you can slide him up a little bit. If there are injuries, he can move up and play on a scoring line if he has to. He has scored at the AHL level, so it'll be interesting to see, but. I think they'll be a little more open to giving the younger guys the opportunity than Babcock was.
Let's move our attention to Dylan Larkin. If he probably has probably the most pressure in the state right now, or high expectations, is for Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. Maybe Dylan Larkin is second, right behind Jimmy, as far as what people are expecting from him, the 19-year-old. He didn't play poorly at the World Championships, and certainly played against men. When you have guys like Ovechkin flying over, and Team Canada was, Sidney Crosby led. I guess my point being is that one Red Wing official explained it to me is, now we're really going to see where Dylan Larkin is at in this playoff run. That he's going to join. Now they play the Utica Comets, I guess, in the Western Conference Final. We're really going to get a better indication of where Dylan Larkin is and where he needs to go. I know, as I said, I think he had maybe one assist or something. I think he was a plus player, though. Was on the penalty kill. I'm not going to say that he didn't distinguish himself, but if you're looking at numbers, his numbers were not, glowing at the World Championships. I'm surprised. I thought maybe he would go back to Michigan for a year based on how the World Championships turned out, even though he won a bronze medal. He was part of the team. But that's what I'm saying. It wasn't that he was bad. He just wasn't, the wow factor just wasn't there for him. Are you surprised that he turned pro? And do you think that, the sooner that he can get under Jeff Blashill, nothing against Red Berenson, of course, maybe the better?
Well, I was surprised. I thought he would go back, because the Red Wings really weren't pressuring him, and they, regardless of what happened, they thought he would end up playing for the Red Wings next season at some point. And the only thing that's different now is they'll get to look at him in the Grand Rapids, and at the start of it. And they'll see him at training camp, where before I think he would have joined, the Red Wings after he left Michigan next season. But I think actually the World Championships did change his mind, because he was very comfortable playing against NHL players. He didn't have numbers, but his role was a little different. I was told by Todd Richards, the Columbus Blue Jackets coach, that he looked like an NHL player, he acted like an NHL player, and that he had a very mature game for a 19-year-old. And by that he meant he's very defensively responsible, and he could play against any of the players over there. And he would do a good job defensively. He wasn't really he was occasionally with some guys who can score, but Jack Eichel, got Brock Nelson as his winger, and Trevor Lewis, who was playing very, very well. And for a while, Larkin was playing with Anders Lee, but at sort of midway through, Benino ended up with Anders Lee, and I think Dylan Larkin ended up pretty much on a checking line, which was the role they gave him. But I think that did change his mind. I think it was important for him to get over there and get comfortable, and he was able to check out and see whether he could compete. And I'm sure even though he didn't have points, he said to himself, I can skate with these guys, because he was one of the fastest guys on the ice usually.
Right.
And I think he felt that he can handle himself with the defensive responsibilities. But I mean, what I took away from watching the World Championships on television was, okay, as high as we are on Dylan Larkin, he's not Jack Eichel. That is clear. There's a difference between being I think his chance to be a great player, but Eichel's a superstar, like in the making. So I think we should probably temper our expectations, at least initially, because he's still a very young guy. But I still think he's going to blossom into a number one center. I mean, you can't skate that well and have that measure of composure and have the all-around game that he has, and not end up being a successful player.
When you look at the chances now, we have said, and we've talked about Dylan Larkin on previous episodes of the Red and White Authority. When we look at it, we always thought that if he stayed at Michigan, as you just said, that next year he would turn pro and he would go right into the Red Wing lineup. We thought that if he turned pro, and we didn't, I didn't see him playing for Grand Rapids this year. I really didn't, especially when this, the longer this decision had, and then going to World Champions, as you said, changed his mind, that he would start the season out in Grand Rapids next year, and then maybe by Christmas time or something that he would be in the Red Wing lineup. Do you think it's possible, based on what you saw at the World Championships and what we're about to see perhaps, and now I'm asking to speculate, that Dylan Larkin could make the Red Wings out of training camp next year?
Well, I do think it's possible, but there's a lot of factors involved with it that goes even beyond what he does in training camp. Where's the mule going to be? Is he going to be ready to play? Is Pulkkinen going to have to make the team? Because they only got so many roster spots, and they got a lot of bodies. So something's got to give. Does Stephen Weiss, is he gone? Like if Weiss is coming back and Pulkkinen has to make the team, and Franzen is healthy, where's the spot for Dylan Larkin? I mean, even if he's a great player now, it could be one of those situations. Remember when Kenny Holland sent Nyquist down and there was a general uproar? Well,
right.
People didn't understand how the roster situation. They needed to wait until they had an opening because of an injury, and I think that it could be a similar situation where you just send them down and then not hope, but when you get that injury that is coming, then you bring him up then. But the salary cap has to be taken into consideration, and Yurko's another guy. Where does he fit in? At this point, and the other thing we haven't talked about Stephen Weiss. Will Blashill get more out of Weiss than Babcock did? Is it possible? Yeah. We just don't know.
No, we really don't. I mean, I think it's going to be a fascinating summer. I want to ask you real quickly about the conference finals right now. Tampa Bay playing very well. Ben Bishop is kind of holding his own against King Henrik. I thought Lundqvist, the overtime goal that he gave up to Kucherov, I've never seen it. First of all, how honest is Henrik Lundqvist? I mean, he says, he couldn't believe, he says, I saw it, I just couldn't pick it up right at the end there. I mean, he was so disheartened by that you have to think that he's going to bounce back in a big way. But You know, Kevin, it looks like maybe the toughest round that Tampa may face getting to the final could have been against the Detroit Red Wings.
Well, the players have mentioned that. I was in a scrum with Alex Calhoun, which was 2 days ago now. I forget now because now I'm in Chicago, but catching up with that series. And he talked about that they were talking about the open ice that they found. And he goes, yeah, well, he said, it feels like it's wide open. Because it really feels like it's wide open in comparison to what we faced in Detroit when we just didn't have any room to get going. So he sort of paid homage to the Red Wings on this. But King Henrik is playing like a commoner, and the last two games it's not been pretty. And here's the bottom line: the top six forwards on the Tampa Bay Lightning scored all of their goals in a 6-5 win. The Rangers got 5 goals in that game, but 2 were by defensemen and 2 were by Jasper Fast, who's a younger player, and 1 was from a top 6 forward in Derek Brassard. So they got to get their guys going. Nash has no points in this series. Martin St. Louis has no goals in the playoffs. King Henrik has given up 12 goals in 2 games. Chris Kreider didn't have a shot on goal and has only had 2 shots on goal in his last 4 games. Carl Hagelin, the Michigan great, who does look dangerous out there, is -4 in his last 2 games and is below the production that he had last season in their march to the Stanley Cup final. So this Ranger team, if they want to take down the Lightning, they got some work to do. They need their best players. This is a cliche, but there's a reason why coaches say it all the time. The Rangers' best players have got to be their best players, and because guess what? The Lightning's best players are really their best players right now.
Well, right. I mean, Tyler Johnson is just had an incredible playoff run. With that said, let's go over to the West. I'm going to give it up to the Anaheim Ducks. I mean, this team is finding a way to get it done because, especially with the way Patrick Kane is playing right now, I really thought that Chicago was going to be an unstoppable force, and maybe they still can be, but, Anderson is holding his own. He's played very, very well, and, the Ducks are more than just Corey Perry, Ryan Kessler, and Ryan Getzlaf. This is a very good hockey team, and they're going to give the Blackhawks all they can handle.
Well, that's for sure. It's hard as this to say about a team that racked up as many points as the Ducks did, and they might be underrated. If you're looking at all of these teams that's left, or any of the teams that were in the playoffs, who's performed better than the Ducks have? They only have 2 losses since the playoffs began, and last night was a great indication of this team. Anderson had 27 saves, and the Ducks defenders and forwards blocked 27 shots. They just did a great job. They out-hit Chicago 45-27. They just played just a great road hockey game in winning that game. And then Simon Desprez, which he was acquired from the Pittsburgh Penguins near the trade deadline, had to be the best trade of the trade deadline because he has stepped into their lineup. He's a big, strong kid who can skate. He got a big goal last night, the game-winning goal. And he's been part of their defensive unit the entire playoffs. So, this is a really good Ducks team, but I would say you can't count out the Blackhawks. I mean, Red Wings fans know, how many games they've won since 2009 in the playoffs, and they can play so many different styles. They're a very impressive team, so I'm not ready to count them out yet.
I was talking to a couple of Red Wing fans, Kevin, and I know that we're going to let you go and enjoy the Windy City there and all the fine restaurants, and you can take a jog around the lake or whatever. But the thing that they were saying is, do you think that because Chicago has used the Detroit model and plays like the Red Wings, and up until Detroit was in the Eastern Conference, they seem to play the Ducks a lot in the playoff series, and granted, rosters change, but Getzlaf and Perry have played against Detroit a lot in the playoffs. Now they're playing against Chicago, that there is a little bit of an advantage that even though Chicago can be intimidating and they're a great puck possession team and they're relentless and they keep coming at you, it's nothing that Anaheim hasn't seen before. I mean, is that a legitimate point, and maybe something that we have forgotten, that, okay, they may not have a whole huge history with Chicago, but they certainly have one with Detroit, and it's tough when you watch Chicago to play, if you're a Red Wing fan, not to think about the Red Wings.
Yeah, no, that is true. I think that's an interesting analysis. I would agree with that. And the one thing about the Ducks too is they have some similarities with the Kings as well, which the Blackhawks are familiar with. They have some bigger players, especially now that they have Michigan native Ryan Kessler, as the number 2 center behind Getzlaf, and that's a load. I watched that game last night live at the United Center, and I just watched. You have to deal with Getzlaf coming over the boards at you for 45 seconds, and then you draw a breath that you've gotten rid of him without scoring, and then here comes Kessler, who's almost as big and maybe even more ornery than Getzlaf. So that's a favorable matchup that the Ducks have at center, because Taves, can only be out against one of them, and then it falls off from there. I mean, you're dealing with Brad Richards, who's past his prime, Andrew Shaw, who's a smaller, feisty, but much smaller than those guys. So the Blackhawks are at a center disadvantage, to be sure.
All right, Kevin, then I guess the final question, to bring it now back full circle, back to Mike Babcock. Through the course of the year, we thought that he was gone for sure. Then we thought, wow, he kind of likes this Red Wing team, that he was going to stay. Then we didn't know. But I guess if we were to look at, let's go the past 365 days, I'm under the assumption that you and I both think out of, maybe 200 days or so where we thought he was leaving, and maybe 165 days where we thought maybe he was staying. So I guess we're not that surprised that he's gone, but are you surprised it was to Toronto?
Yeah, for sure. I just didn't think he would go there because I thought he was all about winning. But, the reason I was wrong is we just didn't anticipate the level of money. And I can't say this enough. I keep telling this to my readers, but that is life-altering money. Oh, yeah. And that's what we're so used to throwing around these figures of these large contracts that sometimes we forget how it changes people's lives. And getting $6 million a year, like, he's not an athlete. He's a coach. Now, he was paid well at $2 million, but $2 million is not $6 million. And it's not over 8 years. Under his old contract, if he worked 8 years, he'd get $16 million. Now he's getting $50 million. So I think that's what we didn't anticipate, and I think that was a game changer, the amount of money and the amount of years he would get that money.
I would tell you this. I mean, making $2 million a year, when you open up that paycheck or, your direct deposit or you check it, your bank statement, you would be like, I'm sure that would be a humbling experience. Wow, that's a lot of money. If you open up a check where you're getting paid 6.25 or whatever it is million a year, I would have to have someone standing behind me because I think I would faint.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, that's got to be an astronomical number, regardless of what the tax structure is, and all your deductions and saving, for retirement or whatever. That first payment for him. I think Mike Babcock is. I can't see how he's not going to freak out.
Yeah, and I've put it into terms that so people can understand, and I've said this. Suppose that I suddenly became owner of a waste management company. And I called you up, Art, and said, Art, I want you on my waste management company. I'm putting you on a truck, and you're going to go around, you're going to collect garbage, but I'm going to pay you $450,000 a year if you'll accept a 5-year contract. But you got to give up radio and podcasts and everything else that you do connected with sports. At this stage in your life, that $2.5 million or close to it, you'd have to do that.
Oh, yeah.
You just would have to do that. And it just, would set you up for retirement. It would set you up for the rest of your life. And I think, they're asking Mike Babcock to be the coach of a dream team for him when he was a kid, and they're giving him $6.25 million. Like, that wasn't even a judgment call for him. Of course he had to go.
Yeah, there's no question. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like Kevin and I are going to have to do a little talking after the podcast here. It sounds like Kevin's going to be a waste management mogul, and I'm definitely going to work for him. Did you hear what he's going to offer me?
Yeah.
This is
gonna
great,
happen.
Kevin. I mean, I'm signed. I'm there.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't mind where we, hopefully, just give me a little, my whatever you call it, the iTunes thing, and I'll pick up garbage, no problem.
Yeah, Michelle's going to be so happy.
Oh yeah. Have you let Terry know that you're about to buy?
No,
a waste management magnet.
I have not broken that to her yet. So.
No, really. I think she enjoys being married to a Hall of Fame hockey writer. I don't know. You might want to, like Mike Babcock did, talk to the missus and see maybe before you make that move. But anyway, all right. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we'll end it. Everyone have a happy Memorial Day weekend. If you're in the United States, if you're Canadian, have a happy Mike Babcock weekend, because I know a lot of you are probably partying, or if you're not and you're PO'd about it, then have a couple Sleemans on me. But with that said, I'm not sure how the schedule is going to work out, Kevin. I don't know. I guess as news breaks, we'll at least do one Red and White Authority each week.
Yes.
And then once the finals and when the awards banquets and then free agency, we'll probably do more. Certainly at Jeff Blashill's press conference, depending on when that is announced, I would assume that you will be there. I will be there. We'll try to maybe get an interview with Blash somehow, because you know what's great about Blash? Not that Babs wasn't technically savvy, but I think we can probably hook him up, and he knows how to use a laptop. So
that's right.
Yes. So when we tell him, the people will see you. I think he won't freak out. I think he'll understand that. But Kevin, enjoy the Blackhawk Anaheim series. I mean, you think Tampa's going to beat the Rangers, or do you think these are still pretty close? They're still kind of toss-ups.
Well, I think Tampa's going to win that series. I think I think the Ducks now, to me, even though I picked the Blackhawks, I think the Ducks look like the team to beat now that I've come over to this Western Conference. I mean, that was a pretty impressive win last night. It was a real thorough win where they were very, very effective, and they really just didn't give the Blackhawks much. So right now, if you ask me, I would think the Ducks are going to win.
Yeah, you know what? Like I said when we started, I've been really. You have to be really impressed with Anaheim, especially even though they didn't play great hockey clubs, but the environment that they went into in Winnipeg and Calgary, where those people were bonkers for their teams, showed me a lot of where. And Bruce Boudreau, true. We were speculating, depending what happens, Babs might end up back in Anaheim.
Yeah.
And I mean, you got to tip your cap to him. Well, with that said, Kevin, I guess I can talk all day, and I know you're saying, "Look, man, I want to get out of here." You've been on the radio. I'm pulling a Jack Ebling on you. I'm gonna keep you a lot longer than anticipated. But with that said, that'll do it for this edition of the Red and White Authority, episode 25. We've reached a quarter of a century, and we didn't plan it this way. But a milestone like this, and Mike Babcock no longer coach of the Detroit Red Wings. It's been quite a week here in Detroit. Actually, it's been quite a year in Detroit with this Babcock story. So we do wish Mike well. Again, enjoy the holiday. Kevin, enjoy the hockey. For Kevin Allen, I'm Art Regner. Have a safe and pleasant one, everyone. We'll see you next. A few days from now, I would say, on Red and White Authority, episode 26. Take care. Bye-bye.